Hello there, you are watching TMH TV from Washington, D.C. My name is Stalin Gabriselassie. My guest today needs no introduction. Many Ethiopians know him very well, as he has been one of the top Ethiopian political analysts focusing on Ethiopia. Dr. Tsaggaye Ararsa is a Melbourne-based legal scholar who specializes in constitutional law, human rights, and federalism. Dr. Tsaggaye, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stalin. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Let's talk about the Tigray election. When we talk about Ethiopian politics, the greatest political development in Ethiopia currently is the Tigray election. Tigray conducted successfully its regional election, and it has shown to the Ethiopians and to the world that COVID-19 cannot be a reason to delay democracy. What's your comment on that?
Yes, as you know, the national election, the election for the federal parliament, and the state's election has been postponed on the pretext that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to make it difficult for people to rally during the campaign and to go and vote during the election. At the time, we said that two things were possible. One is to bring the election ahead of time, bring it forward, and do it before the expiry of the term of office of the federal parliament, or to amend the constitution and say that the term of office of the elected offices will be extended in exceptional situations to 6 years. And through that, they can have a constitutional process of an election that can also deal with the problem that might be created because of the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this wasn't understood. This wasn't taken seriously by the government. And what happened actually was that they thought a constitutional interpretation through the Constitutional Inquiry Council, where it was not necessary. As you know, constitutional interpretation is called for only when there is unclarity in the law. The law was very clear that the terms of office of the state and federal legislatures is 5 years, and therefore the tenure of the government is only 5 years. There's nothing that's unclear about it. There's nothing that was supposed to be clarified through interpretation, and there was nothing that calls for any interpretation at all. But because the Prime Minister already arranged for it, he had his own technocrats, his own lawyers, who had come up with this idea of putting on a spectacle of interpretation and expert hearing in the Constitutional Inquiry Council. And in the end, they said, yeah, we can't conduct election because of the spread of COVID-19. And because of this, we are going to postpone the election indefinitely. The most specific kind of injunction that we got from the Constitutional Inquiry Council, and then which later went on to the House of Federation and got confirmed, says that election can be held only after the World Health Organization gives advice that COVID-19 is no more a threat to the world, and only after the Ethiopian Parliament deems it not a threat in Ethiopia. And then a year after the Parliament says so, the election can be conducted. And when does the World Health Organization say that COVID-19 is not a problem anymore? Nobody knows. When will, accordingly, then the Parliament says that COVID-19 is not a problem in Ethiopia? Nobody knows. And that was why we said election is basically postponed indefinitely. Now, this indefinite postponement of the Ethiopian election is completely unconstitutional. We said it's utterly unconstitutional. And all the political parties in Ethiopia, all of the opposition parties came out and said, no, it is impossible. The consequence of that was that the existing parliament continues to govern, and its government continues to rule only up until the end of the term. The term normally ends according to the constitution, at the end of 5 years. But 1 month ahead of the expiry of the term, national election and state elections have to be conducted, and representatives must take their place. And then in the coming Ethiopian year, there will be a meeting, an opening of parliament, both houses, during which they will form the government. Now, that means that the parliament sessions every year get opened only in late September or October. And so now, in the absence of any election, the Ethiopian government has only a few days that it can legitimately stay in the office in. So because of this, the Tigrayan state legislature decided that although there is, yes, COVID-19 pandemic in Ethiopia, although we do not believe that it is a sufficient reason to postpone the election, because there are a host of countries that conducted the election in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic. And although this is a reality, the Tigrayan legislature said we can have an election. We will control the spread of COVID. We will take every necessary measure to reduce the spread and also conduct election. The moment they said that, and they resolved to hold their own election and sought support from the National Electoral Board, the National Electoral Board said this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable because it is unconstitutional. It is unconstitutional because the Constitutional Inquiry Council said that because of COVID-19, the national election has to be postponed. And then the argument became very technical among lawyers, and as one of the lawyers who had taken part in public discussion in various media outlets, I myself was saying, okay, the federal government, the federal election might be postponed because of that unconstitutional ruling. However, the fact that the federal government cannot hold elections does not mean the states cannot have their own elections. And the National Electoral Board is an institution that is that has the responsibility, the duty to organize elections when elections are necessary. It doesn't have the power to outlaw elections that a state legislature or anyone for that matter wants to do in their own jurisdiction. And so the Abiy's government wanted to bully the states, generally all of the regions, but because the Tigrayan region was ruled by a different party, which is TPLF, which is not a member of the Prosperity Party, but the others are ruled by the Prosperity Party, so that he had a sway there. But in Tigray, they couldn't do that. So in Tigray, they sought the help of the National Electoral Board to run the election for them. The Electoral Board said no. Then they had to establish their own electoral commission. They had to institute their own electoral law. In fact, a very interesting, fascinating constitutional innovation happened in the process. They amended the electoral process from the plurality system to mixed member parliament system, which is a form or a variant of the proportional representation system, which was long overdue to happen in Ethiopia anyway. So through that constitutional innovation, they went on and conducted the election. And of course, even after the election was conducted, Abiy's government said that this should be outlawed, and this is a defiance of the federal government, and this therefore necessitates the intervention of the federal government through the order of the House of Federation. All that was only to overwhelm, intimidate, and bully the Tigrayan National Regional State, and it didn't succeed. But the more important thing about the Tigrayan election is what is it? What is its significance, and what does it really mean for Ethiopia? I think these are the things that one has to understand and underscore. The significance is that, first and foremost, it is a powerful reminder of the existing constitutional signposts in Ethiopia, and the fact that there is an enduring framework for managing transition to electoral democracy. It says basically, it made a statement that there is a constitutional framework within which you can exercise power, you can assume power, and you can leave office when your term has expired. So that's a powerful reminder. This is not a lawless state. This is not somewhere you can ride your own on the base of your own whims and conjectures, just because you came at a time after the popular movement that made the government dysfunctional. Just because you promised a transition to democracy, you don't have a free hand to rule and to assume power, to take power and to use power in any way you want. There is no right of rule given to you just because you came promising change and reform and democratic transition. Democratic transition has a framework within which it was to be managed, and that was the constitution. And so the Tigrayan election is a very powerful reminder that there is a constitutional signpost still, there is a constitutional framework still, although the federal government is consistently and constantly undermining, defying, violating that constitutional order. So for anyone who is wondering how we can do the transition to democracy, that was the constitutional framework, but that constitutional framework, when it was broken at the federal level, the Tigrayan National Regional State, by conducting the election in accordance with the constitutional schedule, said, yes, there is a signpost, there is a symbol of the operation still of the principle of rule of law in that country. That was the first important significance. The second significance is that, again, this election was a reminder that in Ethiopia, we have a federal system, that this is a federal polity, that this is not a country where what the federal government says is what everybody should obey. This is not a polity where there is only one government, one site of enacting sovereignty. It is a plural polity. This election showed that this is a federal polity in which there are at least two governments, there are at least two legislatures, there are at least two demos, demoi, as they say, two democratic peoples. I mean, the sites of exercising democracy, sites of exercising popular sovereignty, if you like. So the fact that even when there is a rigged kind of interpretation at the federal level to extend the term of office of Abiy's regime unconstitutionally, that there is an election being conducted in another jurisdiction within the same country is a powerful reminder that there is a plurality of states in Ethiopia, that there is a plurality of governments, that there is a plural site of exercising and enacting popular sovereignty. That's the second important reminder. And the third is that the right to self-rule, which is also an aspect of federalism, the right to self-rule and the more fundamental right to self-determination, which is very powerful organizing principle in the Ethiopian constitution, still is alive. That's what it reminded us. That self-rule is not something that you can run roughshod about. Self-rule is not something that you can just put aside and move on. Self-rule is a very important Republican right, if you like, of communities that they hold dear to their heart, that they will fight for, and they have fought for in the past. So self-rule is alive and kicking. That's what the election in Tigray has reminded us. That the more undergirding and the more powerful principle the more foundational principle of self-determination is still alive and kicking. As I always say, Ethiopia is haunted by the specter of self-determination, and the specter has now showed itself to be really a powerful hook which can stop any dictatorial impulse at the federal level. And so it continues to constrain any dictatorial urge from the center. The center is not having the last word on Ethiopia's politics, at least in the periphery. Fourthly, the election in Tigray is also one thing that reminded us that the states have their own agency. They are not just annexes, they are not just appendixes to the federal government. You see, some people think that this is a defiance of the government, as if there is only one government, and as if that government has the last say, and all the rest are only extensions of that federal government, which rule the regions on behalf of the federal government. No, these are different autonomous states. That's the idea of federalism. And in fact, of course, this cannot sink in the thinking of Abiy Ahmed, because if you look at the way Prosperity Party is organized, is that there is the federal level Prosperity Party, and the branches are only branches which are there only to implement the decisions of the national level Prosperity Party at the state level. So that is not something that is congruent with the federal nature of the country. So for them, because they have organized themselves in this way, they can't understand why one party can have predominance in one region, and there what it decides becomes, I think formally through its legislative institutions, becomes the law of the land in that particular region. So they didn't understand this division of jurisdictions because the states have their own collective agency, that they are a separate legal entity, that they've got their own legal personality. Because they couldn't understand this, they thought the election in Tigray was illegal and should be outlawed. It's a sham election, etc., etc. But, as I said earlier, the election was a very powerful reminder that the states are legal entities. The states have their own collective agency. The states have not just implementation power, but decisional power. That they are not the extensions of the federal government. That they are not the branch of the federal government. They are not the executives of the decisions made at the center. So in that sense, it's a very powerful constitutional moment in Ethiopia, because for the first time, the states are saying, or the periphery is saying, I make the decisions and I implement my decisions within my realm, and nobody else can change that. And so, in effect, the election basically said to Abiy Ahmed that you don't have the last word on what matters to our people, on what is important constitutionally, legally in this country. The rule of law has the last word, and the people have the last word. So it's in that sense that the election in Tigray is a very, very powerful constitutional innovation. And in fact, for many years to come, people are going to write about it. I mean, constitutional lawyers at least are going to be fascinated by it, writing about it, and see the innovation even within the existing deepening constitution pieces.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Tsagay, as you stated earlier, the House of Federation rigged constitutional interpretation by extending the power of the Prime Minister, the term of the Prime Minister, and the key question right now is the House of Federation mandated to extend term of office of regional governments?
That was one of the problems with this interpretation process. This constitutional process. What was at issue even when the Prime Minister moved for interpretation, when his lawyers called for interpretation in the Constitutional Inquiry Council, was exclusively the federal constitution. And in fact, of course, the Constitutional Inquiry Council and the House of Federation are interpretive and adjudicatory bodies of issues that pertain to the federal constitution. And that's as far as they could go. However, at the end of the hearing process before the Constitutional Inquiry Council, and after the deliberation of the House of Federation, the decision that came out was a decision that also extends the power of the state legislatures and therefore the state governments that were constituted by the state legislatures. And that was completely uncalled for, because at the time, the Prime Minister sought interpretation to extend the election, interpretation only of the federal constitution. And then by the time it reached the House of Federation, they came out and said the regional states too cannot hold elections because there is a COVID-19 threat. Now, they can say the federal government is not going to hold elections because there is this COVID problem, and then there is the problem of weakness of the electoral board and so on and so forth. They could say anything, because the magnitude of logistics and the magnitude of preparation that has to be managed at the federal level obviously might be bigger than a particular region's logistics and campaign and so on and so forth. Okay, and also the magnitude of the spread of COVID-19 might be different from region to region. And maybe, luckily, the Tigrayan National Regional State has less degree of spread of the COVID-19 than other regions, although the testing is much to be desired in terms of how many people have been infected, how many are recovering, how many are really threatened with death, how many died, and so on. Nobody knows for sure everywhere. All right. Now, if the Tigrayan National Regional State says, A, the spread of COVID-19 in my region is such and such, and this is how I'm handling it. Of course, there was an emergency declaration, and then there were sufficient necessary cares that were being taken, and so on and so forth. And they said, even if it is a dangerous, there is a dangerous spread at the time, you see, you cannot bypass a constitutional limit to the term of office. And if they insist on this, nobody else can say, no, we insist for you. We know for you that COVID is more difficult for you to manage, and therefore you cannot do elections. You just can't say that. And so the House of Federation did this, and obviously the legislature in Tigray did not accept it. And they moved towards establishing their own electoral commission and changing the legislation. And then they called for elections, and they have managed to conduct the elections peacefully and I think properly in a very fair and free manner. And it was a very efficiently managed election, probably one that has never been done in this way. Now, the House of Federation, why did it do this? The House of Federation had a very difficult position, I understand, because Abiy wanted to use it as an instrument of justifying his staying in power without any electoral mandate. You can see this because there was a lot of maneuvering around the House of Federation. And by the way, for me, even that decision is not acceptable. First and foremost, because the interpretation is not called for. There was no need for interpretation. Secondly, when the Constitutional Inquiry Council has done the hearing and sent its recommendations, the Speaker of the House of Federation said, this thing is simply a political maneuver to ennoble dictatorship, to assume power without electoral mandate, to violate the constitution and completely undermine constitutional integrity of the nation, and to insult the nation's nationalities and peoples of Ethiopia who are sovereign. Because in Ethiopia, these collectivities are sovereign per se. They're not sovereign by derivation. They are sovereign, and it is the federal government that gets sovereignty through derivation. right? So she said, because this is against self-rule right of the states, because this is against the self-determination rights of the people, because this is against this violates the principle of sovereignty of nations, nationalities, and peoples, according to Article 8. She made a call to all the nations, nationalities, and peoples, all progressive forces in the country, and she resigned publicly. At that moment was a very serious moment of constitutional crisis. When a person says, we cannot allow this, this is completely against the Constitution and the undergirding principle behind the Constitution, which is popular sovereignty and right to self-determination, then the nation should stop and think. Instead, what they did was they just ignored that and elected another speaker and went on with the decision as if nothing has happened. That was absolutely unacceptable, legally speaking, at least. And so whatever decision they have made after that is obviously illegal, because this is not an ordinary member that just resigned. It is the Speaker of the House. So when she resigned, that was supposed to stop everything, and it didn't. That's very unfortunate. And because of that, we have this a stalemate now, where the Tigrayan state wanted to do the election. The federal government didn't want it to do the election. I mean, the Tigrayan state, it didn't want the Tigrayan state to have its election. And because of that, there was a standoff. And in the end, they came through, the Tigrayan state came through, and they had their election. And as I said, it is going to be remembered and celebrated for many years to come.
Mm-hmm. As you are well aware, Dr. Tsagay, many Ethiopians are now very much concerned that Ethiopia is falling apart, and the international community is following a kind of laissez-faire approach on Ethiopia. You think the international community is well aware that Ethiopia is in a deep crisis right now?
I think those of them who closely follow up developments in Ethiopia are aware of what is at stake and how difficult things might be. Even the friends of the government, the friends of Abiy Ahmed, who were very much impressed by what they thought is a promise of reform, are a little disillusioned with him, and they are concerned. A case in point is the Secretary of State of the United States, which have met Abiy Ahmed in the Sudan a few weeks ago, and have expressed his dismay about other issues in the realm of international relations, in the area of Sudan's recognition of the State of Israel and so on and so forth, and about the Nile Dam issue, and on quite a number of issues, at least the American government, in relation to the GERD, in relation to some other regional strategic cooperations, and in relation to democratizing the Ethiopian state, they knew that Abiy is not the guy who has it, who can do it. However, for them, it really came to a breaking point when he postponed the election. They realized that that was a no-go thing. That wasn't supposed to happen. But one thing that the international community is not very familiar with is the federal system. The federal system has a bad press generally because of its detractors, and its detractors have always been saying that the federal system is one that is planned to balkanize Ethiopia, to divide, to dismember Ethiopia, almost like a conspiracy. And it is the strategic tool used by Ethiopia's historic enemies to undermine its sovereignty, its national interest, and so on and so forth. The worst kind of dictators actually go as far as saying that the federal system basically is a genocidal move calling for a dangerous ethnic cleansing, and that they have this doomsday kind of anxiety mongering discourses around the federal system. So its detractors are also very vocal outside of Ethiopia, and they also inhabit some institutions in the great diplomatic corridors, whether it is the United Nations or in the State Department or in various Western countries. And they use, and the embassies and the other lobbying institutions use these detractors' statements against the federal system. And they kind of mislead the diplomatic community, the international community. And because by nature, a federal system is a little complicated to understand and to do things, because there are layers of sovereignty, layers of jurisdiction, and so on and so forth. It's not easy to understand which one is government and which isn't, etc., etc. And the international community wants to have it as one unit, and that's it. They don't want, investors don't want a plurality of governments to deal with. They want one government, and they want to have one lease office to do everything for them, and they want to be done. They don't want to see this plurality thing. And it has been always an issue that was discussed among investors from, foreign direct investors whenever they come to Ethiopia. And usually it is Oromia in particular, because, most of the investment projects are revolve around the city of Addis Ababa, which is basically the Oromia region, the special economic zone, the industrial parks, and so on and so forth. And most of these Chinese companies, when they come and they ask for a lease, land lease, or various investment permission, and so they have to go to the Addis Ababa office, they have to go to the federal government's office, they have to go to the Oromia regional state's office, and they say, "What the hell is this?" And they consider this as a bottleneck. They consider this as a breeding ground for corruption. Now, there is corruption, of course, but it's not just a bottleneck. It's not just a bureaucratic ground that kind of fosters corruption or parochial exercise of power at the local level. No. It is the nature of the system. It's a federal system, and the integrity of the constitutional order demands that every jurisdiction makes a decision at its level. And because there is this hostility from the international misunderstanding, really, not hostility, from the international perspective. Now, when this idea of divisiveness about the federal system, this idea that the federal system, by recognizing collective right to self-determination, group rights, etc., pits people against each other, that there will be conflict and so on and so forth. When it is compounded with this kind of narrative, it makes the people in the diplomatic corridors of the world pause and think again. As they say, wait, so this federalism thing is a very dangerous thing. And so that's why now we have the Tigrayan region, which is ethnically constituted, quote unquote, is rejecting the other regions which are inhabited by other people. And so this is too complicated, and this might lead to genocide. So we just have to contain this somehow. And so the usual refrain, if you have seen resolutions coming from Western organizations, is that individual rights should be respected. Individual rights, not collective rights, not the right to self-rule, not decentralization. No. Although you remember, in the recent years of democracy aid, democracy funding, decentralization and good governance is very key and central. I worked for the United Nations Development Program, and one of the conditions for democratic aid is that decentralization is part of it. However, when it comes to the current existing federal arrangement in Ethiopia, everyone in the West is panicky about the recognition of self-determination rights. So the refrain in the resolution and reports is that there should be respect for individual rights, as if that's not already there in the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution has a whole chapter devoted to human rights and about 31 articles. And out of that, it's only one article that's devoted to collective rights, and the rest is about individual rights. And so almost like that country does not recognize individual rights, they talk about the importance of respecting individual rights. So there is that misunderstanding, and there is also a lack of defense, of a robust defense of the federal system to the international community, and the fact that it is good and deepening democracy. Now look at the election in Tigray, when the entire country is going off track, veering off the route of transition to democracy, when the entire country is basically falling under the dictatorial regime of Abiy Ahmed. It's only because of federalism and this principle of self-rule in there that at least one region bulked out, and at least one region said, wait, we can't just ignore the constitution and renew our mandate haphazardly. We just can't, because this is a country of rule of law. This is a country of popular sovereignty. This is a country of self-determination of peoples. This is a country where people alone can decide who has to rule, up to when he has to rule, and how he has to rule. It's only people who decide, not us, not even a reformist, messianic transitional leader. No. And so one has to understand that the decentralization, the federal system, is actually helpful to deepen democracy, to expand the horizons of democracy. It's to entrench the need for democratic transition in Ethiopia, democratic reform in Ethiopia. So in that regard, there is a lack of understanding, because Ethiopia is also a very complex country, and there is fear-mongering that is propagated by the detractors of the federal system. However, I think now there is a traction, because there is more and more conversation opening up in the realm of human rights, in the realm of electoral democracy, in the realm of federalism and respect for autonomy of states, and so on and so forth. And I think people find it difficult to understand the constitutional system and the nature of what is at stake, because Abiy has extended his term of office without any democratic mandate. But they also understand that Abiy is not the guy to lead the transition to democracy. He has proven to be A, incompetent, B, unwilling, and C, in fact, sinister in terms of respect for human rights. As you have seen recently, there is an attempt to use the law as a weapon to eliminate his opponents, and that's why we have political trials going on now in relation to Jawar Mohammed and on. And of course, probably we would come back to this point later in the course of the conversation.
Dr. Zagay, now let's talk about the justice system in Ethiopia. Now many people are saying, and clearly reports are showing, that the right to life in Ethiopia is highly compromised at this time, and the justice system in Ethiopia is totally in danger. Let's talk about the political trials in Ethiopia and the continuous human rights violations in the country.
So, yes, at the moment there is a political trial going on. There is high-profile political leaders and influential activists and politicians such as Bekele Garba, Jawar Mohammed, many OMN journalists, many OLF leaders, Oromo Liberation Front leaders, and other political leaders, including people such as Iskandar Nega, Lidatu Ayalio, who has just been released, I suppose, on bail, and several other people have been imprisoned, and most of them are now standing trial for an alleged crime that's not really a crime. And most of these people have been arrested, at least people such as Jawar Mohammed, Bekele Garba, Hamza Borana, and the UN journalists and so on and so forth have been arrested because of their activity on the aftermath of the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa. And of course, that's a very bogus kind of charge. It's a political weaponization of the law to eliminate the political adversaries. And that's why we have framed it as a political trial. And as you know, I am also one of the people who is in the long list of accused. I have seen this through social media reports, although I haven't been formally served yet. And so I will be responding to that only when I am so formally served. So there is this massive mobilization of the law to attack and eliminate the opposition, to cripple, to enfeeble, and to render the political opposition not up to the task if in the event that there will be any election, so that they will not be competent enough to compete against the incumbent if there is going to be an election. Now, apart from this compromising of the principle of rule of law and the idea of legality in that country, by basically using the law as a weapon of attacking the opposition, there is also a massive problem of failure on the part of the legal system to protect human rights in general, to protect the right to life. As you know, during these last 2 years, Ethiopia witnessed something that it has never witnessed in many, many, many years since the time of Red Terror. We witnessed a series of political assassinations, and the chief of staff was assassinated. The chief engineer of the Renaissance Dam was assassinated. The logistics officer of the former logistics officer of the defense forces, Abarra Ghazali, was assassinated. The regional president and associates of the Amhara region were assassinated. And their assassin himself, General Azam Nosage, was assassinated under the direct order, we learn now, of Abiy Ahmed himself. It went on further. High-profile political assassinations took the country by the grip. When Hachalu Hundessa, a very famous Oromo artist, was assassinated. And there was before that an attempted assassination on the life of Jawar Mohammed, then only an activist and a media mogul, later turned out to be a politician who joined the Oromo Federalist Congress, and probably only because of that, he was also now put in jail. Now, during all this time, two things happened. The politics failed the sanctity of the right to life, especially of high-profile political individuals, because the politicians did not even care to constitute a neutral inquiry commission to investigate how these assassinations were perpetrated. To date, we do not know exactly how the assassinations happened. And secondly, there was no, and the second level failure is the failure of the judiciary, the failure of the legal system. So the politics failed us, and then now the legal system. The legal system failed us because there was at least immediate actors who were arrested in association in relation to the assassinations. A case in point, for example, is the assassin of General Sahara, the chief of staff. The guy who assassinated, who actually pulled the trigger to shoot him, whoever is behind it is another matter. That guy was seen by the wife of the general. And this has been on the media through a documentary. And this person was right there when the assassination happened. That person was arrested, then he was killed. But then no inquiry further from there. And anyone associated with that should have been properly investigated, properly brought to court. And the prosecutor hasn't done anything as yet, the police didn't do anything. So the entire law enforcement institutions failed. Apart from that, there is this massive human rights violations in the country, arbitrary arrests, killings. It's getting into thousands now. Communal violence, sometimes instigated by the government itself, and no inquiry has ever been made. The perpetrators have never been brought to justice, and in fact, the violations haven't stopped. And many of the regions, most of the regions now, at least Oromia altogether, and the southern nations, nationalities, regional state, the Benishangul Gumuz National Regional State, these areas are ruled by arbitrarily posited command posts, military command posts, and the army is stretched across the country, trying to normalize situations or waging a war. In the case of Oromia, under the pretext of eliminating insurgents, armed insurgents. And so the right to life has become nothing at all. And ironically, this is in a country where the Constitution says that the right to life is sacrosanct. It is a very sacred, fundamental human right. And so the judicial system failed us. The human rights system itself wasn't that strong even before. I mean, there is a lot to be said about why it is weak. But the Human Rights Commission, here and there, they talk about the excessive actions taken by the government security forces. Here and there, they talk about arbitrary arrests and overcrowding in prisons and so on and so forth. But they are not robust enough to condemn the assault, really, the assault made every day, almost as a matter of routine practice on human rights. And people feel threatened. People do not anymore feel protected by the law enforcement and security officials. Life has become really unpredictable, especially if you are associated in some ways with the opposition, or sometimes if you are speaking a language that's different from whatever the government does not like. Example, just recently after the election in Tigray has been completed, we have heard that some people who speak Tigrinya, who live in Finfinne, have been targeted for attack. And this happens every day. People get arrested arbitrarily. They will be frisked, and their properties are confiscated by security officers, by uniformed police officials, and people don't know when their life is really exposed to danger from the state security apparatus. We have seen recently in Oromia there is a massive arrest, a massive surveillance conducted on Oromos who have traditional dresses that they want to wear for the Irecha event, and they are stopped from wherever they are going. Cars are stopped, transport services are stopped, people are frisked, they are searched, and if they have any traditional dress, those will be confiscated and the people will be returned to where they came from. And this has become life really hazardous and very unpredictable. And this is where you see the entire legal enforcement, law enforcement institution system and the political system are all mobilized at this one and the same time for only intimidating and eliminating, when possible, anyone that poses like an opposition, anyone that criticizes the government. A very interesting news I just heard today is a very prominent politician by the name Lencho Letta had a visit to the prison to visit Jawar Mohammed and Bakala Garba And when he came back, Abiy sent his agents and told him that he shouldn't have done that. And from now on, every amenities that he had from the government, like basic services such as housing or some pocket money or some transport services, those will be interrupted. And this is just because they went to visit their colleagues and friends in prison. And this is very strange. And this is the kind of system we have. The politics has failed us. The entire law enforcement institutions have failed us because they were all mobilized only to eliminate dissent, only to eliminate political adversaries of Abiy. If you talk about reform, if you talk critically about how things have gone off track, then you are a candidate for any attack.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about Ethiopia's future after October 5. Now, it's very obvious that Prime Minister Abiy's term of office will expire on October 5, even though Prime Minister Abiy argues that he extended his power constitutionally. What will be the consequence after October 5 and the Ethiopia's future? And because many people are very much worried about that.
Yeah, that's a very big question, a very difficult question, really, to respond to. But what is obvious is that after October 5, the government will have no legal or political constitutional mandate to rule. What's obvious is that there will be a power vacuum, at least at the federal level, and in the 9 other states, other than the Tigrayan National Regional State, where there is a constitutional government with a government that has just renewed its mandate electorally. Now, what happens then? Whither Ethiopia? Where is it going? And people, nothing is predictable because Abiy's government has lost its mandate, and it's any signpost, any the semblance of legal ground on which to continue as a government, and which means everybody, any political actor in that country, has equal right to claim power in that country until electorally validated. Abiy's power is no more. Until electorally disowned, the other's power is not necessarily non-existent. Everybody can claim a mandate now, depending on the polls, okay? What then? It is going to be a crazy world. What happens is that this situation actually deepens the crisis that already existed. I think as a constitutional lawyer, I think of a number of things about how to fill the power vacuum that comes about because of the expiry of the term of office. The power vacuum that comes about now can be filled possibly by a number of constitutional institutions or constitutional actors. And the first and most important constitutional institution is the Ethiopian Defense Forces. The reason is it's the custodian of the constitution, the custodian of the sovereignty of nations and nationalities and peoples, which is also whose expression the constitution is. And the defense forces have responsibility to protect the sovereignty of the nation from external attacks, to protect the sovereignty of the nations, the peoples, from internal disruptions, internal crises, internal crimes, and peacelessness, a state of peacelessness and conflict. So the army now, although it is commanded by the prime minister under normal circumstances, given the fact that there will be no prime minister after October 5, the army cannot accept the order, obey the order from Abiy Ahmed. However, it has got the responsibility to bring sanity to the political chaos that comes about after October 5. How does it do that? I think one of the things it should do, and this is one of the things that we have been talking about in Amharic, even on Tigray Media House a few days ago, one of the things that the army should do is to probably organize itself into a Supreme Command Council and call for civilian politicians, all civilian politicians, to come together and establish a kind of interim government that does a couple of things. First, to coordinate action during this transition until a duly elected, constituted government, and duly constituted government is in place. A group of politicians, all of the political parties in the country, all of the political actors and all the stakeholders, namely the civil society organizations, traditional leaders, professional associations, labor unions, all these must come together, apart from the political parties, I mean. All of them should come together and try to agree on a thin transitional document, which helps to do two things. One, to coordinate action in relation to the responsibility of the army to defend the national sovereignty and to protect the constitutional rule. The second, to make sure that the services, utilities are continually provided to the people in the country, like education, transportation, communication, water services, electricity services, all sorts of things. These things must continue as usual. So the bureaucratic wing of government should continue, but the political mandate from the top, because of the absence of a government, a cabinet, and a prime minister now, cannot exist. Therefore, the group that is going to form a kind of transitional government, therefore, should be able to coordinate action in these areas. And third thing it does is to make sure that law and order is established. Just because there is no political leadership that is constitutionally mandated to rule doesn't mean that everyone can do anything it wants. So there should be at least basic protection of law and order, and the judicial system must continue to operate. The police system must continue to operate. And these kind of activities should be coordinated by a group of transitional leaders constituted from all parties and all stakeholders in the country. This is the first plan of work that a transitional government does in cooperation with the Supreme Military Command that could be would show itself out from the military. The second thing they should do, and this is the primary thing that they should do, is to agree on a roadmap for transition to a democratic election. And for that, they need to agree on the timeline. They need to agree on the kind of process that they will go into. They need to agree on how they can oversee or at least support the electoral board in order to make sure that a proper election is conducted within the proper time. And of course, they would also do some overseeing activity in relation to the media, in relation to civil society organizations, in relation to campaigns, and so on and so forth. So they should agree on a very minimalist, small text on the roadmap towards a democratic election. And in the process, they should bring people together. It's kind of if you like, a national unity government now. It's not really a national unity, but at least a national consensus government. And all of them should agree on the fundamental grammar of the Ethiopian politics, on the basic framework that is already in place for government, which is the constitution of the country. And so one of the things that they should agree on is, on a short order, they should work towards getting back to the constitutional signposts. So they would agree on this, they would set a timeline, and try to address the concerns of all the parties as they go into the electoral system, the election with some sense of trust, some sense of predictability, with some sense of, say, security in that country. Now, as they do this, however, it is very important that they also, one of the when we talk about the need to continue basic social services, one of the things that we are operating, one of the contexts we are operating under at this point in time is the COVID-19 pandemic. And so even after the expiry of the term of office of the government, somebody has to be in charge of countering the pandemic while also working on the transition process, while also working on in collaboration with the military and other constitutional institutions such as the Human Rights Commission, Ombudsman Institution, National Electoral Board, Auditor General, and so on and so forth. As they do that, one of the things they have to do is they should make sure that the COVID pandemic is properly counteracted. Because if that's not going to be handled, whatever political activity, including election, cannot be really properly managed. So in terms of priority, this should be one important thing. But after October 5, if we are going to go back to the constitutional signpost, one of the things that they should do is to agree on a roadmap, on a minimalist document that will take us to election, that reminds us of the constitutional signposts and the framework, and that should continue to ensure the safety and security of people, the national sovereignty, and the integrity of bureaucratic wing of government.
Mm-hmm. And now let's talk about the member states of Ethiopian Federation. Many Ethiopians, including you yourself, argue that member states of Ethiopian Federation are getting weaker and weaker over the past 2 years since the coming of Prime Minister Abiy to power, and there is a high demand of statehood across the country, especially in the southern part of Ethiopia. So are the Ethiopians, and you as a constitutional lawyer and human rights lawyer, where are we heading to, and where is Ethiopia standing right now?
Well, the Ethiopian Federation is constituted of 9 units so far. But last year, because of after the Sidama peoples had referendum, we had the 10th unit added to the federation. So we've got now 10 states. And there are many more demanding for statehood, especially those which were in the amorphously organized Southern Nations and Nationalities and Peoples Regional State. A case in point is the Walaita, the Kambata, the Hadiya, the Gamo, and a number of other people, about 10 or 11 national groups, have sought their own state. And this has been very much on the mind of Abiy Ahmed's transitional government so far. But from the very get-go, Abiy has been very much resentful of these demands. And because of that, he took a very hard, heavy-handed measure vis-a-vis the Sidama. About 167 people were killed in one day because they sought referendum in July 2019, before 5 months before the election. And that was the referendum. That was a very mismanaged process. And then later on, somehow, when it became inevitable that the Sidama will ensure that unilaterally even will declare statehood, Abiy finally agreed that the referendum be conducted. And of course, the referendum resulted in 98.5 vote for statehood. And because of that, Sidama became the 10th state. And the others, and again, Abiy resented another demand, such as the Walaita. And as you have been following, I assume, recently, many Walaita, at least about 36 of them, were killed in one day because they sought the referendum to be organized, and the military intervened harshly to suppress them. And suppress it couldn't, but really injured so many people. And it's still a place, a region that is under the command post. The Walaita case is a very sad case at this point in time, because the leadership was arrested, the zone's leadership were arrested before, and because of popular protest, they were released, and now they are again targeted for arrest bit by bit, and now I think they are really, the federal government is really on their toes to keep tracking them and repressing them. And the Walaita people are not relenting, and they consider themselves as a regional state already. And the Prosperity Party had been trying to conscript the Walaita leadership into its own structure, and they have been inviting them to the gathering, the meetings, the assemblies of Prosperity Party of the region, and they have been saying, we're not members of the Prosperity, we do not respect we do not participate in their meetings, because we are a different party, and we will continue as such. And because of that, there is a heavy-handed security measure being taken on the leadership, and that's very tragic. And what was the reason why Abiy basically resists this demand for statehood? As you know, the right to statehood is a very legitimate constitutional right. The Constitution provides for it, and anyone can separate from the state that it now belongs to and establish its own state. And this is provided for in the Constitution under Article 46 to 47, Article 46 and 47. And in order to do that, you only need to meet some criteria. Why is it that Abiy actually politicizes what wasn't supposed to be political? This was simply something that technically, through legal processes, be finished and states are constituted, and that would be it. I think the reason is because he comes to this constitutional system from a very different angle. As I always have been saying, Abiy reads from another script when he deals with Ethiopia's politics. He doesn't read from the constitutional text's script. He actually resents the Constitution and the federal order that the Constitution establishes. His idea was that this nation-based, self-determinationist kind of federal arrangement, which considers identity, consent of the people, settlement pattern, language, etc., as a criteria for creating states. He basically rejects that, and because this is dangerous for the unity of the country in their narrative. The result is that he wants to undo the federal system. He wants to rethink and recast the regions that already exist, let alone have more regions, more states. The existing states are being rethought. One example of that is the Oromia regional state. As you know, between July and September, before the expiry of the term of office, Abiy's plan was to divide Oromia into 8 clusters and rule them through a military command post. And this is part of the resistance of the Qeerroo and the Qarree on every occasion nowadays, particularly after the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa. And this is because he wants to reorganize, restructure the federal arrangement. The existing states have to be broken, and they should have no ethnic identity. They should have no this natural right to sovereignty, collective agency, so that they can be easily manageable from the center. This is basically a complete displacement of the existing federalist dispensation by another dispensation from a bygone era, from the imperial times. Replacement of the state system, the federalist state system, by a Flagger system, a unit of the country. That's what basically it means in Amharic. Now, this has been made clear a long time ago. Immediately after assuming power, he had his own map a northern region, southern region, western region, eastern region. And then there is the center, which is Addis Ababa. And this was the kind of map they came up with, he and his cohort of his supporters, parties that are a cohort of his supporters. All of them had this kind of plan. Because this way, they said, we can strengthen national unity. This way, we can undermine this local nationalist sentiments which cling to the right to self-determination and local self-rule and so on and so forth. And true to that commitment, Abiy has just recently, just yesterday, managed to create a new state from the rump Southern Nations and Nationalities and Regional State, which is the Southwestern State, they call it, which includes a host of peoples into 5 zones and now a 6 special district in the area. The Southwest is really an area that is so intensely diverse, and also an area where there are so many demands for statehood. The Walaita, the Dauro, the Gamo, this is where the Gamo, the Derashe, what used to be the Southern Omo area, which is in its own right extremely diverse, where you find people such as the Bench, the Shakka, the Kafa, the Shakko, the Mursi, the Malay, the Bodi, and all these people. So now what they came up with is to create a Southwestern state, again, based not on the people's identity, but rather on a geographic, arbitrary collection of peoples turned into a state. And that was the plan. In fact, if you remember his statement to the Walaita people, and he repeated this in parliament, in relation to your demand for statehood, we will respond to it, but give us time. Wait for us patiently. And the way we respond to it will be in such a way that every other group is properly integrated with you, and so on and so forth. This has been, there is this complete underestimation of these demands of nations and nationalities and peoples, underestimation of their sovereignty. When the Sidama sought the referendum, one of the proposals that was submitted through Abiy, of course, but from other groups called experts, was that Sidama will have will be a separate state only if the Gedio and the Burji and the Amaro are also going to be part of the region. But they didn't demand that. And the Sidama had just done a referendum. How is it that you attach another people to a group that demanded only its own self-rule? It's just incredibly illiterate in terms of understanding the Constitution. And that's why I say he reads from another script. The script says that some people who look alike should be just brought in one geographical category, no matter what their interest is, no matter what their historical narrative is, historical memory is, no matter what the desires for difference and the desire for association that particular group of people have. This is basically a misunderstanding and a complete underestimation of the notion of national sovereignty within Ethiopia. And so now they've created, out of the rump state of the southern nations and nationalities and peoples, created the Southwestern state. Is this going to stop the demand for statehood? No. In fact, nowadays, there is much more agitation about the loss of sovereignty, the loss of self-rule, the loss of self-determination of peoples because of the maneuvers that the Prosperity Party is doing. Now, these states want their own state, want to have a democratic governance, and want to have elections, and so on and so forth. There is no way that this spectral presence of the right of self-determination, the spectral presence of the principle of autonomy and self-rule can be silenced by ordinary political machination at the center. The center truly and genuinely doesn't hold at all now. Because no matter what you do, people are going to ask, are going to demand more rights, not less. In fact, if you look at the time between 2016 and 2018, the time of the protest, people were asking for more implementation of the constitutional promises, more autonomy, more federalism, federalist decentralization, not less. And now Abiy's government comes and they say less autonomy, less constitutional implementation of the constitutional promises, because the constitutional promises are dangerous for Ethiopia, less federalism and less self-rule. And it's impossible, because once the wheels of a federal arrangement have started to run, you can stop it only at your own peril. Once the people have tested autonomy, you can't stop them. You can't repress them. However hard you try to repress them, you can't push them back to a state where they were less autonomous. If history is something to go by, I think Ethiopia should remember how the day the Ethio-Eritrean Federation was dissolved in 1960, that day an armed insurgency, an armed struggle started in Eritrea. And if that was what happened in 1960, you can imagine what would happen now. And so there is a more demand for rights of statehood, and there definitely will be many more states. But the problem now is that at the federal level, we will have no government in a matter of 2-3 days. And when we don't have a government, what we have to first do is to create some degree of stability at the national level to protect the country from foreign provocation, to make sure that peace and stability and law and order is respected at home, and make sure that services, public services and utilities are continued to be provided by the bureaucratic wing of government. And then all political actors come forward to begin to negotiate on the roadmap to an electoral democracy and a return to the constitutional signposts. Once that is done, after a government with an electoral mandate is established, both at the federal and regional levels in the 9 states, then of course, we can now, within the regional state councils, frame the issue of referendum for those people who have demanded their right, and they can have a referendum, and then they will validate their statehood in that process. Until that time, what no one can do, whether it is an interim government or the military or Abiy's government, what no one can do now is provoking the national groups which demanded the right to self-rule. To attack them is not going to respond and address the question. You can repress them, you can kill them, you can kill the leaders, you can arrest them, but in fact it exacerbates the situation, it antagonizes the people against the government, and it is not going to solve anything. It is going to deepen the crisis at the state level and take it to the social level. So as if the political crisis is not enough, now we are going to have a social conflict at the communal level. And so what no one should do, whether it is an interim government that's going to be formed, whether it is Abiy's government, which might want to continue through force, or whether it is the military, which has the responsibility, of course, now to protect the country from external attack and internal instability. What they cannot do is to attack these groups which are demanding statehood. Let them enjoy their statehood de facto as a zone, using their own zonal leadership. However, they distance themselves from the existing regional framework. They have to be kept there, and we have to wait for them with sense of understanding, with humility, and with a sense of empathy to say, look, we understand this, but we need to wait until we have a national government of some kind of democratic mandate. so that you can have a stable circumstance, a stable context in which you can have a referendum. That, I think, is the only way to go forward.
Thank you, Dr. Tsagay. We are almost finalizing our discussion, but before that, if I give you 2 minutes, what would be your last word for the international community and to Prime Minister Abiy's government?
That's a big call. To the international community, I think the first and foremost, the call is to understand Ethiopia more closely. It's time for them to send their diplomats, their people the experts, to understand the country and the geopolitical stake in there. To understand the system also, to come close and understand what the constitutional system looks like, how the federal arrangement works, how complex the domestic politics is, how it's not only one government that is in existence, and how you have to look through and beyond Abiy's government. So that's the first thing. Understanding is very important, and they have to be willing to listen to another narrative. The narrative the Western countries are getting are the ones that come from the embassy, the embassies of this inept government, really, which is bent on doing propaganda, which basically says, without us, the country will be dismembered. Without us, genocide will happen. Without us, geopolitical interests of the West are going to be adversely affected. That kind of narrative is a wrong one. And secondly, Ethiopia also exports, the Abiy's government exports a false narrative about federalism, how it is divisive, how it is bringing about and spreading conflict, how it is leading to displacement, how it is causing ethnic cleansing, and so on and so forth. That statement is a statement of political detractors that always have been against the federal dispensation and the right of people to self-rule and autonomy. Now, that kind of narrative is being exported to the diplomatic community through the embassies. And whenever that kind of explanation reaches the corridors of the international community, they have to take it with a pinch of salt, because there is more at stake in that country. Thirdly, they need to understand that Abiy's regime, for all its prestige, quote unquote, which it got because he was a Nobel Peace Laureate and so on and so forth. Abiy's regime, for all this popularity, at least for the first half year, is not committed to democratic transition. When it is, it can't pursue the agenda of democratic transition. From day one, we have been saying that this government must quickly organize itself in such a way that there is a platform, a consultative platform for all political parties where they can sit down together and draw a roadmap for democratic transition. Abiy said, no, I am the transition. I will lead you to the democratic dispensation that you are looking for. And unfortunately, he manifestly proved that he is incompetent or he is unwilling to ensure democratic transition. The problem that we are now having, the crisis we have gone into, the power vacuum that is impending, is the result of Abiy's unwillingness, I suppose, or if he is willing, his incompetence. And this has to be taken into account when we look to Ethiopia and what is going to happen after the 5th of October. Now, one of the things the West has to look into, particularly his allies, is that Ethiopia is a very important geopolitical entity in the Horn of Africa. And Abiy's politics has fomented more division, more polarization, and more instability, not just domestically, but also through his tactical alliance with another undemocratic regime, Isaias Afwerki's Eritrea, and has now affected adversely the Ethiopian position as an anchor of the Horn of Africa region's peace. And so, even for geopolitical purposes, Abiy is not a competent and credible ally. So they should be very careful in looking into the situation and trying to build a more robust government of national consensus, which can also be a credible partner in the area. As for Abiy Ahmed, I think his time, he has run his course. And even if there is no opposition now, there is nothing he can do about this crisis. He can't just turn himself a Democrat by some magic in a couple of days. I think the best thing if he wants to have a happy exit out of this is to resign and to apologize to the Ethiopian public and to take responsibility for what has happened over the last 2 years and the deep crisis that he has led us into. But knowing Abiy, he won't do this. Knowing Abiy, he, let alone resign, is already sending the message that he is misunderstood. But he is this messianic leader that was meant to save Ethiopia from all the chaos he sees caused by the existing federal and constitutional system. Will he learn a lesson from his predecessors? And will he, in time, resign and show remorse and seek forgiveness from his people? And through that, he will find an exit, and that would be a win-win case. That will be, I think, a triumph. That will be a good thing for Ethiopia. From what I see and from everything that we see around Ethiopia now, he will want to continue in power, and that will polarize the whole situation. And my fear is if he continues, he might lead the country into a full-fledged civil war. God forbid that will not happen. God forbid that we go into a more difficult political confrontation, military confrontation. And I hope other measures will come through before all that happens. And my hope, my very blind hope, if you like, is that the constitutional institutions will somehow make a move to either convince Abiy or remove Abiy from his position and lead the country into a better, stable, better situation, the circumstance of stability and peace.
Dr. Zagaye Ararsa, thank you for sharing your time with us. Viewers, you are watching TMH TV from Washington. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.